Most cybersecurity videos tell you the same three things. Use a strong password. Turn on two-factor authentication. Don't click suspicious links. Today, I am not going to tell you any of that. Today, I want to talk about something most Americans have no idea is happening right now, quietly, state by state, without a single national headline about it. Your data privacy rights are no longer the same across the country. Depending on which state you live in, you may have far more control over your personal information than someone living just one state away, or far less. Welcome to Cyber Safety Brief, where we explain simple cybersecurity advice for everyday Americans. This video is based on authentic, legal, and publicly available cybersecurity and privacy information. Everything here is for awareness and protection only. Nothing in this video involves hacking, unauthorized access, or anything illegal. This is purely about understanding your rights and protecting yourself. Let's start with the basic reality nobody explains clearly. The United States does not have one single federal data privacy law that covers every American the same way. Europe has the GDPR, which applies to the entire European Union the same way, no matter which country you're in. America never passed anything like that at the federal level, so instead of one national rulebook, individual states started writing their own. California went first years ago, then Virginia, Colorado, Connecticut, and Utah followed. And now, more and more states are joining in, each with their own version of what counts as your data, what rights you have over it, and what businesses are required to do with it. In my opinion, this is one of the most underreported stories in everyday American life. We talk about big data breaches, we talk about scams, we talk about hackers, but almost nobody talks about the fact that your basic right to see, correct, or delete your own personal data literally depends on your zip code. That is not a technical detail. That is a fundamental shift in how privacy works in this country, and I think most people are walking around completely unaware of it. So let's break this down properly. I want to give you a clear, practical understanding of what's actually happening, why it matters to you personally, and what you can do about it, no matter which state you live in. Point 1. You might have more rights than you think, or fewer than you assume. Here's the part that surprises people the most. If you live in a state with a comprehensive privacy law, you likely have rights you've never used and possibly never even knew existed. Depending on your state, you may have the legal right to ask a company what personal data they have collected about you. You may have the right to request they delete it. You may have the right to correct inaccurate information. And in several states, you have the right to opt out of your data being sold to advertisers and data brokers entirely. Now here's the twist. If you live in a state without one of these comprehensive laws, none of those rights exist for you in the same enforceable way. A company could be doing the exact same thing with your data as they are with someone in another state, but you might have zero legal standing to stop it or even find out about it. What I personally think is that this creates a strange kind of digital inequality. Two Americans, same country, same internet, same apps on their phones, but completely different levels of control over their own information. I don't think most people would accept that if they realized it was happening. But because it's buried in legal language and state legislation, it just quietly exists in the background. A real example of this actually playing out happened in California, one of the states with the strongest privacy enforcement in the country. A platform used by schools to sell tickets for sporting events, school plays, and dances was found to be tracking visitors and using that tracking data for targeted advertising without giving people a proper way to opt out. California's privacy regulator stepped in, investigated, and fined the company over $1 million. The company was also required to change how it operates going forward. Now think about that for a second. This wasn't some shady overseas hacking operation. This was a legitimate business used by regular schools and regular families, and it still got caught quietly collecting more than it should have. In my opinion, that case is proof that even everyday platforms we trust without thinking twice can cross lines when there's no strong law forcing them to be careful. And in a state without strong privacy enforcement, a similar situation might never even get investigated in the first place. So, what can you actually do here? Step 1 is simple. Find out if your state has a comprehensive privacy law. A quick, safe search for your state name plus the words consumer privacy law will tell you. If your state has one, learn the 2 or 3 rights that matter most to you. Usually the right to access your data and the right to opt out of having it sold. If your state does not have one yet, that doesn't mean you're powerless. It means you rely more heavily on federal protections that already exist for specific situations, like health information or financial information. And you pay closer attention to opt-out settings that companies are still required to offer under other rules. Let me know in the comments if you knew your state either has or does not have one of these privacy laws before watching this video. I have a feeling most people genuinely don't know. Point 2. Businesses are already treating you differently based on where you live, and you probably haven't noticed. This next part is something most people never think about, but it's happening constantly in the background. Many companies operating across the entire country have started building different versions of the same website or app, depending on which state a visitor is coming from. If you're in a state with strong privacy laws, you might see a clear cookie consent banner, an easy-to-find privacy settings page, or a visible link that says something like, "Do not sell my personal information." If you're in a state without those laws, that same company might not show you any of that at all, because they are not legally required to. The way I look at it, this is one of the clearest signs that privacy in America has quietly become a patchwork system rather than a shared standard. The company isn't doing anything illegal by treating users differently. They're simply following the law that applies to each visitor based on location. But from the average person's perspective, this creates a false sense of consistency. You assume the internet works the same way everywhere. It doesn't. What most people underestimate is how much of this happens completely invisibly. You are never told, "Hey, you're seeing a stripped-down version of your privacy options because of where you live." It's just quietly there or quietly missing, and you have no way of knowing unless you specifically compare experiences with someone in a different state, which almost nobody does. Here's a practical example of how this plays out. Imagine 2 coworkers who both sign up for the exact same retail app, one living in a state with a strong privacy law, one living in a state without one. The first coworker gets a clear option to opt out of having their shopping history sold to advertisers. The second coworker never sees that option at all, not because the company hid it maliciously, but because they aren't legally obligated to offer it in that state. Same app, same company, completely different level of control. I do not think this is about being paranoid. I think it is about being informed. You don't need to panic over this. You just need to know it's happening so you can make smarter choices about which settings to check manually, even if a company doesn't put them front and center for you. A safe, defensive step you can take right now is this. Go into the privacy or account settings of 2 or 3 apps you use daily. Look specifically for anything related to data sharing, personalized advertising, or third-party data selling. Even if there's no big obvious banner, many companies still bury an opt-out option deeper in the settings menu to comply with rules in other states, and sometimes they quietly extend that option to everyone. It costs you nothing to check. Point 3. New privacy laws are being written or updated right now, and most people find out only after their rights already changed. This is the part that I think deserves the most attention because it's not a one-time event. This is an ongoing moving target. State legislatures are actively introducing, debating, and passing new privacy-related bills on a rolling basis. Some existing state privacy laws are also getting updated with new obligations for businesses, tighter rules around children's data, and new requirements for how companies must respond when you ask them to correct or delete your information. In my opinion, this constant movement is exactly why most Americans stay behind on their own rights. Nobody sends you a personal notification saying, "Hey, your state just passed a new privacy law. Here's what changed for you specifically." You only find out if you happen to come across a news article or if a company sends you an updated terms of service email that you probably don't read carefully anyway. Here's a realistic scenario. Let's say a new state law takes effect that gives residents the right to correct inaccurate information a company holds about them, something that didn't exist there before. If you don't know that right now exists, you will never use it, even though it's legally yours. Meanwhile, someone in a neighboring state who has followed the news closely might already be using that exact right to clean up outdated or incorrect information tied to their name. What I personally think is that this creates an uneven playing field, not because of anything sinister, but simply because privacy literacy varies so much from person to person. The people who actively follow this topic get real, practical benefits from it. The people who don't, simply don't, even though the law technically applies to them just the same. So here is a defensive habit I genuinely recommend. Once or twice a year, do a 5-minute check. Search your state's name along with the phrase Privacy Law Update. You don't need to read a full legal document. Just skim a reputable summary, usually from a law firm's public blog or a consumer protection website, to see if anything new has been added. This single habit puts you ahead of the vast majority of people who never check at all. I would also like to know your opinion here. Do you think it's fair that privacy rights change based on where you happen to live, or do you think this pushes toward a future national standard eventually? I'm genuinely curious what people think about this. Point 4. Even a strong state privacy law does not protect you the moment you cross state lines. This last point is the one that I think gets overlooked the most, and honestly, it's the part I find most important. Let's say you live in a state with a strong, well-enforced privacy law. You've done your research, you know your rights, you feel reasonably confident about how your data is handled, but the moment you travel, work remotely from a different state temporarily, or even just use an app while physically visiting another state, the legal protections that apply to you can shift depending on how a company defines residency versus location at the time of use. This isn't something companies advertise clearly, mostly because privacy law in this area is still genuinely complicated and, frankly, still catching up to how mobile modern life actually is. In my opinion, this is one of the biggest blind spots in the entire conversation around state privacy laws. We tend to think of our rights as something that travels with us, like our driver's license. In reality, privacy rights in America are often tied more closely to where a company considers you to be located at a given moment, not simply where you officially live. A practical, safe step here is this. Don't assume your privacy protections are locked in just because your home state has strong laws. If privacy matters to you, get into the habit of directly managing your own settings rather than relying entirely on legal default protections. Turn off ad personalization manually in your phone's settings. Limit app tracking permissions directly on your device, which works no matter what state you're standing in. Regularly review which apps have access to your location, contacts, and browsing activity. These device-level protections travel with you everywhere, regardless of which state's law technically applies at any given moment. If this video is helping you understand this topic more clearly, take a second to like the video and subscribe to Cyber Safety Brief. We break down real cybersecurity and privacy topics like this one in a simple, practical way, without the fear-mongering and without the jargon. So let's bring this together. America does not currently have one unified privacy law. Instead, it has a growing patchwork of state-level rules, meaning your actual privacy rights depend heavily on where you live. Some states give you real, enforceable control over your personal data. Others still leave large gaps. Businesses often adjust what they show you based on your location, usually invisibly. New laws and updates are happening constantly, and most people never find out their rights changed until much later, if ever. And even strong state protections don't necessarily follow you the moment you're physically somewhere else. In my opinion, none of this means you should feel powerless. It means the opposite. Once you understand that this system is uneven, you can take small, practical steps that work no matter which state you're in. Check your state's privacy law status. Review your app settings directly instead of waiting for a company to hand you options. And build the habit of checking for updates once or twice a year so you're never caught off guard by rights you didn't know you already had or lost. Stay alert, stay informed, and stay safe online. Before you go, comment below and tell me, Did you already know your state's privacy law status before this video, or is this the first time you're hearing about it?